Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to call to order the Homeless Strategies Workgroup for Friday, October 9th, 2020. It is 1:30 p.m. And please call the roll.
Barry Buchanan,
Here.
Tyler Schroeder, Carol Frazee, Michael Lilliquist,
Here.
Hannah Stone,
Here.
Seth Fleetwood, Riley Sweeney,
Here.
Michael Shepard,
Here.
Hans Erkinger Davis, Mike Parker,
Here.
Nick Lewis, Ann Beck,
Here.
Aaron Burke. Looks like, do we have Jen Daly for Dean White?
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you. Flo Simon,
Here.
Doug Chadwick, Mike Hilly,
Here.
Guy Ochagrosso,
Here.
Marcus Steedham, Joel Kennedy,
Here.
Emily O'Connor,
Sorry, here.
Michael Barris, Lisa Marks,
Here.
Is that the end of your list?
yes, sorry, that's everyone.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for being here on a soon-to-be stormy Friday. We have quite a few things on our agenda this morning or this afternoon, and we'll start with we've been looking at our list of strategies and our worksheet and our responses chart, and I think the group that's been taking a look at this, Emily and Joel, can you guys you had some things that you wanted to ask the group this morning or this afternoon?
Just to clarify, are we on families or the matrix of strategies?
Matrix.
Okay, so that's we'll excuse Joel because he has not. That's we'll bring him back to the other conversation. But I wonder, Kathy, is it possible for me to share my screen?
Sure, just a sec.
Okay. So I'll just let you know, group, that a subgroup of us have had just a little bit of time to work on this the past couple of weeks. So what I'm going to share with you today, let me back up for a second. So in looking at trying to make revisions to that lengthy document, we actually felt like it would make sense to kind of start over and pull in the things that felt really relevant and try and fold them into the plan, the Whatcom County plan to end homelessness strategies, so that there's real clear linkages between the sort of bigger picture agenda and the work of this task force. And so what I'm going to show you today is just a really rough draft. Our little subgroup is going to, Ann Beck and Mike Parker have both been helping with that, but we haven't had enough time yet to feel like it's good enough to say, hey, team, how do we feel about adopting some version of this? So today I'm just going to run through sort of a high level overview of the approach that we're taking and see if there's any high level feedback for us. And then our group is going to keep sort of digging at the language and make sure that we feel like it's in a good spot to move forward. So that's where we are. And so I'm going to just run through this super quickly. Can you all see that? Great. I'm taking big. This front page just has a little bit of anchor for us. This is the vision, guiding principles, and core values out of the plan. And I think it's nice to sort of anchor ourselves in what is the community vision around this work in addressing homelessness. I'll note that I added in here 2 guiding principles that aren't actually in the plan. Those are the 2 that are in bold. Targeting interventions to eliminate racial disparities is critical to long-term reductions in homelessness. The sentence above has sort of a soft serve, but no direct acknowledgement around race and inequality. So we wanted to call that out really specifically. And the second one that I added in here is systems and interventions should be trauma informed and focused on reducing trauma, because we know that trauma has such a lifelong impact on those that we're serving, those who experience homelessness, and is such a path forward for us in reducing the amount of intervention that is needed. So these guiding principles, I think, are anchoring for us in our work. For example, it acknowledges that homelessness is expensive and that interventions and investments in strategies that work and are sustainable are financially responsible, right? So when we actually do this work, we know that it means it's an excellent return on our investment. And then I'm particularly fond, of course, of prevention of homelessness as a primary intervention, which is great, I think, for us to remember. So I won't read through these core values, but these are something that are important for us to remember, and I think to elevate up into the community focus when we talk kind of about community education and communication plans. I pulled this Homeless Strategy Workgroup purpose out of our guiding document that was the ordinance that was passed with council. And so these are the 4 things that are sort of our guiding principles or purposes. So the Homeless Strategies Workgroup acknowledges the need for a comprehensive approach, including strategies to address public health and safety and strategies to end homelessness. And there's 4 specific areas here. So identify additional temporary winter shelters, added capacity for year-round shelters, additional opportunities to address the needs of the county's homeless population, which of course is fairly broad, and then identify strategies to prevent people from having no other option but to sleep outside. And I think those are really instructive to the priorities and action items that we put on that matrix. And so I thought it might be nice if those were anchored right into the document itself. This is, and I'll just show you really briefly, it's 2 pages now as opposed to 8. And we sort of identified at this point, and remember this is all super draft form, but 4 kind of action categories, which are those little color-coded pieces. And really our thought about this was that it would be nice for us in our action items and in our discussions and agendas within this group to really identify what it is that we're hoping to get out of the topic on the agenda. And so it might be helpful for us to sort of upfront say, okay, which of our priorities are we currently working on such that this is the discussion space we want to have at the moment? And what are we trying to walk away from having this discussion? So just 4 here to start with. One, that we want to make sure that we have data-driven solutions and assessments. That is to say that we recognize that this body needs to be anchored enough in the data and the information about who is experiencing homelessness and how our systems are working, such that we can make recommendations about actions going forward. And those actions might involve 2, 3, or 4, which are recommendations around increasing funding, recommendations about policy changes, or recommendations on specialty or special or priority populations that need to be addressed. So this table, you'll recognize a little bit these, the far left-hand column is the strategies outlined in the plan, and there are 8 of them. The first, so there's 2 that I've highlighted here that seem like really where our focus in this work group is. And the first is the central point of entry. And this really is about anchoring us in that data. Who is experiencing homelessness? What are the gaps in services? And how can we stay informed about what those trends are in our community such that we can address those needs in looking at interim housing and permanent housing solutions? So this impacts all households experiencing homelessness. This is our coordinated entry system for the community. And it was our hope here that we could identify what information this group might need on an ongoing basis, and then make sure that we're scheduling that into the agenda in a regular way so that we are equipped with the information, really vibrant discussions. And I'll just point out here that there's some things from coordinated entry, from the PIT count, and that we want to make sure we're disaggregating data by race so that we can see where those disparities are. And the last thing I'll say on this point is just that this is not about reinventing the wheel, right? There's already groups who have this data and are looking at this data, but it's our hope that we can just regularly invite them in to give us updates and answer questions that our group has about the experiences of those who are unsheltered or sheltered. These next three categories on this page, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and increasing the supply of affordable housing, these are, you'll see in this fourth column here, it's not the primary work of the Homeless Strategies Workgroup as we saw it, but that doesn't mean that there aren't ways that we can help amplify and support our other collaborating groups who are really looking at these issues. And so some ways that we felt we might be able to do that is to help identify or recommend priority populations, or jump on a bandwagon that helps promote a recommendation about increasing funding. The next one is in that same category, that's prevention and diversion programs. And that's really about trying to divert folks out of the homeless system and helping hopefully reduce the need that they have, or the instance of experiencing literal homelessness. And then this next intervention, interim housing, this is where this work group has focused its time. It's where the charge really is. And so you'll see a lot of the actions are really pulled into this space of interim housing. And so we really looked at three different categories: unsheltered persons, families with children, and then severe weather or winter shelters, as what are the action items of this group. And so there's some pieces in here around looking at data, making recommendations about families with children, for example, and capacity around motel stays or long-term permanent facilities for emergency shelter, not only for severe weather, but for just year-round sheltering. Really looking at things like safe parking and camping, looking at strategies for special population shelters. It might be youth, for example. We've talked about that being a challenge. Those who are medically fragile, we're seeing an increase in folks over the age of 60 experiencing homelessness. So really looking at what are those special populations who are being underserved in interim housing options. And then the next one is economic security. That's not one that this group is really focused on, but the last one certainly is, and that's communications and community engagement. And so this is really something that this group has looked at over the last, 12 to 18 months, right? About what is the communication out, not only about the services and interventions that are available, but also about the needs of the community and how the system is working. And so this is an area that we think our group could really look at. And one thing that was identified through the communications subgroup was that we really need some outside expertise and support in order to lift this off the ground. And that means we probably need some funding to hire a firm to help us identify ways to do better communication with the public. There are some pieces here on the bottom that we sort of didn't pull up into this table, but were on the old matrix. We didn't want to lose track of those, but these are things that either were already in the works, and so they didn't feel like they needed attention right at this moment, or they were ranked as low priority. And so this just says that we'll at least review annually this list to see if there are action items that should be moved up into our ongoing table. So this is something we can discuss in detail. And that's it. That's kind of where we are at the moment. I will figure out how to not share my screen anymore. And oh, here we go. Stop share. So that's just a quick overview. I want to, Anne or Mike, if you want to jump in and add any context there. And then otherwise, would love a little bit of feedback from the group about whether we're way off base or on the right track, or things you want us to keep in mind as we keep digging into that a little bit more to bring back to you more completely at our next meeting.
Mike or Ann, do you have anything to add?
Barry, if it's all right, I'll go ahead, just chime in a bit. Thanks to Emily, who did the lion's share, by the way, of that drafting. So much appreciated. It's been kind of a crazy week, and you can tell by her words that we want to have some more care and flesh it out. I don't really have much really well. The one thing that I do want to bring up, though, is the point that Emily just made at the end, which is revisiting this. And I know that was the purpose of us all looking at it again. But I wonder what the group thinks about kind of looking at priorities. I mean, obviously, we can update it with things that are kind of moving and have plans. safe parking RFP from the city, for example, is a notable change, and we need to update that and the status. But the makeup of the Homeless Strategies Workgroup, and Barry knows this better than anybody, has really changed over the time. And recently, we've got some new members who really weren't present in the rating and ranking exercise that happened. Barry, remember at the end of the thing, we kind of tried to sum up our work and rate and rank, and then make that our recommendation. So if this group would be willing to do that, and it might help to have it facilitated, we might, as an exercise after completing the work of redoing a matrix, then want to engage the current members in a rating and ranking exercise. But that's my only comment really to add.
And I'll just piggyback off of what Mike said. I think that is this group has changed a lot since its inception. We're also in the middle of a pandemic, which has changed the layout of things. And we've got the severe weather shelters, winter shelters, all those things have kind of come after the original group was formed. So I think structuring it within the county's plan to end homelessness is key, which we've got a really good job at that right here. And I think kind of talking about the priorities of this group and what they're interested in accomplishing and what they'd like to see happen would be great.
Well, your work is very much appreciated on this. I can see you put a lot of time into this, and thank you so much, Emily, Ann, and Mike. That's really awesome. So let's open it up, and what's everybody think? Comments, feedback? Riley?
Yeah, I really like that you tied it to the specific pillars of the plan. I think that we, as a group, discuss a lot of good ideas because we're here and we care. But this makes sure that we're focused exactly on what we're trying to accomplish, as opposed to like, yeah, that's great, throw it on the list. So I really like that structure, and good job, you guys.
Michael?
As a new member, I can't tell you how much I appreciate going from 8 pages to 2 pages, because it makes it easier for me to understand the direction. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Other comments and feedback? Michael Lillquist.
I want to thank the group for the reorganization. I think it's very helpful, and I think it was done very well. I guess my only comment, it kind of helps to kind of put things kind of in the right place in the right context. But there's that one large, huge group in the middle, and I think we need to find a way to kind of zoom in on that, because that's where a lot of the work is. And so it's funny that it's all in one group, and so we'll have to have a way to kind of focus and expand on that and spend a lot of our time in that one particular area.
Is that interim housing, Michael?
Interim housing, okay. Right.
Marcus.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in that I did see COVID in a bright asterisk in one of the columns over there, and I just want to make sure that everything that we're doing now has to be framed in that emergency as well. And I just want to add that urgent factor to that. Like it's like how we respond to emergencies under an emergency. So it's all emergency now, and so all of that under this emergency is kind of like, I just want to make sure we're kind of really framing it that way in our heads. Thanks.
Other comments? Jen?
Yeah, I also appreciate the work that's gone into this. It's much easier for someone who wasn't here during the prioritization of the list to understand kind of what the group's main charges are. And I think, Emily, you spoke to this, and I think we'd be interested in another conversation about redrafting this list if that happens. You spoke to special populations or vulnerable populations when you talked about interim housing, but it wasn't called out in particular. And is there? I feel like we talk a lot about vulnerable populations, but it wasn't a group that was maybe pulled out. I'm just curious if that was a conversation you all had, or.
Yeah. Yes, and there's a list in there under unsheltered. There's sort of a list that we as a group can define, like what are those things that we just dropped in what we know at the moment is sort of an easy grab, right? So youth and LGBTQ and elderly and medically fragile, but we can flesh out what that should look like. And it does reference in multiple points that identifying where the target populations and underserved populations can be a priority of this group. So that's a great call out.
Mike.
Yeah, Jen, you and I must think alike. I thought the same thing. And for somebody that hasn't been here to pick that up, you're right. That has been a big focus, I think, of the Homeless Strategies Workgroup, is to really educate all of us, educating each other, that homelessness does not look the same everywhere, and that different folks need different interventions in order to be successful. And so it has to be nimble. So yeah, that's one of the areas that we want to work on between now and the next meeting, is to honor that, all of those kind of call outs, and then to see what did we miss, because it's not just about listing them. It really will then drive some of the specific interventions. So thank you for your comment, and simpatico.
So what does your group think the next steps are, and how would you like to proceed?
Yeah,
Mike mentioned next meeting, so that's music to my ears.
Yeah, we're going to try and get together next week just to do some final wordsmithing on this and make sure that we feel like there's adequate emphasis on issues, for example, of racial disparity, of special populations, and that we're really targeting what are the actionable items that this group can focus on, so that we feel like we're not just sort of re-acknowledging and underscoring that we have a problem, but that we're actually focusing on what is the action we can take that can help with the problem. And so we're going to do some wordsmithing next week, and we hope to have it then in a place where we can email the full thing out to you all to have some time to digest before we come together and get that wordsmithing support from you all as well. And then maybe look at Mike's suggestion around what's the prioritization of some of those action items, so that we can look at the next 6 to 8 months of our work time and think about how to prioritize some action items. That's our thought, Barry, if that sounds okay.
That sounds great. It really does. Other comments? Okay, see, then we'll move on. Safe parking. Does the city have an update, Rick?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. The city has an RFP that's out. It closes October 30th. We've had some inquiries, but we haven't received any responses as of yet. So typically that's not unusual. It's been a fairly short turnaround, and we'll see what comes in. I'll report back as we get closer to the end of the month.
Hey, Rick, what are the policies about? I was down on Lower Cornwall, and I've seen all the RDs parked down there. What's the city's policy on those vehicles parked down there?
Some of those vehicles have handicap placards on them, so they're allowed to remain. Otherwise, it's 72 hours in an unmarked spot. I think that's what was allowed. And I know Flo's here. She could answer more specifically on it. We've had issues. We've tried to put out like Santa cans and things to address it, and they haven't been very successful in terms of use. Yeah.
Flo, anything to add?
No, I think Rick nailed it right on the head. That's what we're doing right now with the campers that are down there.
Okay, thanks. Now, when you say 72 hours, is that a situation where they only have to move a foot or so to change locations? How does that work? Do you chalk tires, and then if they move, then they're fine, or?
Yeah, typically they move either across the street or down the street a little bit. The main thing that we want to try to do is make sure that their area is cleaned up and they're not leaking any sewage or anything like that. And for the most part, they've been pretty respectful about that.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, I was curious, and Rick or Flo, whichever could answer. The city not only put out waste receptacles, but also deployed porta potties. Am I correct in that? And is that still happening? And how is that functioning? Because I remember that was a big need that you all addressed.
So if I could just start on the porta potties, it's been a mixed bag with them. Some locations have worked fine, and others they've had both inappropriate use. They've been turned over. They've had illegal uses go on inside. I think it's a full range, and I can't generalize and say that they work everywhere. A good example is the one bedrooms are closed and many folks who are unsheltered use that area so much. We put a Senecan in front, and it was just gotten so bad that we looked to remove it. At the same token, we're called on to try to put more Senecans out. And it's not so much from it's vandalism, it's crimes, it's inappropriate activities inside. So we're, again, some areas, the area that's across from City Hall seems to work just fine, but just a few blocks away at the library, very problematic.
Oh. Other questions for regarding safe parking, Marcus?
Thing. Hi, yeah, I'm just curious, what happens if no partners do come up for the safe parking request? What would if nobody does apply? Then what happens? Do the funds burn up? Do we put it to somewhere else? Tell me how that works, please.
Well, this is at the direction of the council. There's no dollars allocated for yet. We want to see what comes in from the RFPs. We'd go back to council with proposals that have merit. You know, it's hard. The city is not equipped to run it itself. We don't have the skills nor the abilities to mount that kind of effort. So we look to contract out. Most of the services for the unsheltered in the community are funded by the city. The city is a funder, but the city doesn't provide them. That's kind of the way it works. So we're hopeful that we'll have an applicant, and we've made some inquiries to see if we could find others who might step up and apply.
Councilmember Lillquist.
Just to make that more clear, Marcus, no, the money won't be lost because the money doesn't actually exist. We'd have to look underneath the seat cushion and find it. And luckily we have some pretty big seat cushions, but it would be dipping into reserves to fund it at this point.
Anything else on safe parking? Are there any hands up, Kathy, that I can't see?
There are no panelists with hands up at this time.
Okay, we'll move on to year-round sheltering for families, and back to Emily's team and Joel, I think Michael. So go ahead and take us through it.
Thanks. I have some data to share as promised about emergency motel stays for families. So I am gonna share my screen again. And the first bit here, this is, thank you to Terry, at the director of the Whatcom Homeless Service Center, for getting this data to me so quickly. This is coordinated entry. This is the average days from an intake to a referral to a program. And so you can see this is starting in September of 2019 and going through August of this year. So it covers those early COVID months. And so you can just see kind of that really large increase in the number of days it's taking us from the time somebody comes into the Opportunity Council saying, we're experiencing homelessness, this is for families with children, to the time that a partner agency, and really that's Opportunity Council or Lydia Place, who does the lion's share of permanent housing options for families with children. This is the length of time it takes us to refer them out to a program opening. And partly, so what we're seeing is there's kind of a backlog being created because for a number of reasons. So I'll just move down to this next one. So this shows you the blue line is who is in the housing pool waiting for a program opening. That orange line are the new applicants, so folks being added to that list. So what you can see that's interesting here is that there wasn't a huge increase in the number of requests yet for housing assistance, and I think that's partly due to the moratorium on evictions. Right, we're not seeing that cascade yet, though we do anticipate that it's coming. But we are seeing that gray line, which is a decline. Especially over the summer, and the number of program openings that we've had. And so what's happening now is that's pushing that blue line up. And if we went back even further here, we would see that blue line 2 years ago was way down in the teens for families with children. We were doing so good with capacity that we had gotten to the point where we were having discussions about what is our system going to do when we reach functional zero, and how do we convert some of our existing resources that might have been in the interim housing world to permanent housing, because that's where the need is. And now, of course, as you can see, we're back in between the 80 and 90. The last data was somewhere in that range from Terry and team. So this is this is the biggest jump that we're seeing in the households experiencing homelessness is with families with children. So our adult-only households, for the data that we have, is staying fairly stable through COVID. But families with children, we're seeing that wait list increase really significantly. I think that's all I'm going to share on this piece. And then I just want to, sorry, give me 1 second while I switch data points here. I want to share with you the summary of motel stays. And this is for that same period of time that we were just looking at. So this is September through August. And I'll let you know what some of these little acronyms are. So that first column there just has the number of families served. So Opportunity Council during that time period had 76 families with children in a motel. Lydia Place had 20 and DVSAS had 10. This is our biggest source.
I think Emily's frozen.
She looks frozen.
Okay.
While she's frozen, just really quickly about their last chart, and I imagine that Emily would make this point, but one of the things that has happened, as folks may be aware, is the Bellingham Whatcom Housing Authority has had to suspend the issuance of new vouchers due to the fact that essentially they were overspent. So this is not like a policy call or something really awful or funding yanked, but that has made a really strong effect. And so we are not seeing the people leave the housing programs that we would. It was kind of a graduation, I guess, if you will. You could leave your rapid rehousing with rent paid by the homeless housing system, kind of graduate and get an independent Section 8 voucher. And that was true for families with children. It was true for some youth and for some seniors. So it was used by many different population groups. So just to call that out, but also to just not to kind of hold them harmless, because it's not a matter of a policy decision or they yanked it. It was really kind of an unfortunate balancing act with HUD. But its mark just needs to be noted. It's not just people like stopping serving, right? That didn't happen. There's just no throughput.
Does anybody else from the group that looked at this have anything while we're waiting for her to reconnect? Maybe we could skip real quickly to our next agenda item and then come back to this once Emily gets reconnected. It shouldn't take too long. The winter shelter, temporary and emergency, just kind of a report out.
Hey, Barry, I'm happy to share a little bit about this. You know, I think the last meeting I shared with the partnership that's happening with Base Camp and CTK to create extra space. And, you know, that's not necessarily a severe weather response. I did reach out to partners who've worked with us in the past for severe weather shelters. You know, as the health department, that's kind of the lead of what we're taking. It's a public health emergency. And so what I heard back from folks who've helped us in the past, and it's a challenging time, as everyone knows. I mean, many of the folks in the congregation or in their who've been helping with the projects just have too much going on. The emotional capacity, I think, for just about everybody in COVID right now is pretty strapped. And so as of right now, we don't have any of our former partners who are interested. However, we have started having some great conversations. I met with Jen earlier today at Northwest Youth Services to talk a little bit about how we can maybe serve certain populations, youth specifically in this case, to try to find a shelter space or something that would work for shelter during severe weather for them. And so we've just kind of started having those conversations, and part of that was reaching out to shelters that are already going to be available to staff with youth, the people who are experts working with youth to be able to help staff some of the shelter sites to help get youth in and make them feel more comfortable. We're still just trying to figure out these pieces to how to make it work, because we don't seem to have a lot of partners that want to do this at this point. And so we're trying to figure out the best way to utilize what's out there and still try to tailor it for the needs of the community. So that's kind of where we're at. I wish I had all the answers and everything was good to go, but we're trying to make the best with what we got, and that's what we got right now.
Mike.
And thank you so much for that and for all of that reach out. And I'm sorry to hear that you're not getting yeses, but kind of understand maybe why some of those organizations weren't. I'm curious, one of the things last year that was kind of helpful is looking at total capacity, right? And then making sure that when it got colder, that there would be enough capacity. I guess what I'm hearing that base camp plus the arrangement with CTK is deemed to be kind of insufficient in quantity, or is it just kind of along the lines of like youth, for example, special populations? Could you comment on that? Is it both quantity?
Yeah. I mean, as of right now, with the CTK and base camp partnership, and CTK has talked about wanting to open up, not necessarily based on weather, but capacity at base camp. If it's starting to get full there, they'd like to be able to open up, even if the weather hasn't dipped down, to create more space, which is great. And so the total is about 200. We're estimating about 235. In that other space, we could hold about 35 folks with COVID precautions in place. And from what I remember and I think I mentioned it before in this group, what I remember last year, I think our capacity when all the shelters were open, we had 211 people in shelter. At that time, we did have a specialized youth shelter, and that shelter had numbers that night. So there's a couple pieces to this. I want to know that we're doing what we can to try to get as many partners on board as possible, because I hear from the community, and I know that that this isn't going to meet everyone's needs. And I don't know that we'll ever be able to meet everyone's needs, but I want to know that we're trying to find the appropriate space for the right groups, and that we're trying to reach out to as many partners as we can. So that's part of the continued outreach. As of right now, we have more capacity than we did last year. And it sounds like with the partnership that's happening between those two, they'll be opening up at times when it's not 28 degrees, but rather even warmer potentially, if the capacity is there. So that was a big ask of the community last year. So I'm grateful for CTK and Base Camp to do that. But I guess the moral of the story is I'm going to continue to do the outreach until until I can't anymore. But we do have more capacity now than we did last year.
Thanks, Ann. Marcus?
Yeah, great. And that's actually good to hear that there's a temperature, some variance in the temperature lines on that. And I'm glad to hear there's some increased capacity. I think you said 211 last year was our maximum of intake. It's fair to say that we didn't have the best ability to get the information out to everybody who needed shelters. A lot of people didn't know shelters open then, and there were a lot of people who probably would have taken, judging by the outreach we were doing on the streets at that time. It's fair to say that there was going to be a number of people who probably would have taken advantage of the shelters and just weren't able to, and in some cases perhaps didn't fit the parameters of those shelters. I'm not exactly sure how it all worked out in the end. But I am thankful that the temperature thing can be, we can raise the temperature a little bit. It was one of the things that I was raising my hand about it. I'm hoping that in the presence of extra dollars, perhaps, I remember that last year the budget was the main reason why 28 degrees was where we decided for emergency winter sheltering. And if we have extra dollars available, maybe we should just use those dollars to raise the temperature once we have identified our emergency shelters, so that we can make it a little less dangerous to hit that mark. Sounds like that's a good softening though, and I want to hear more about that. Thank you.
Okay, I want to get back to Emily, so let's wrap this up quickly. Michael, go ahead.
I think I don't quite remember the way Marcus did. The county's advisory group that chose the 28 degrees as opposed to 32. I don't think they were talking about budget, but I don't recall exactly what drove their decision, because they were a housing advisory group. They weren't like a budget and program group. So it was Ann Deacon, I think, that was on that group. I don't know, Ann, Beck, if you know why 28 was chosen, because I don't think it was budgeted. I don't think that was the reason.
And do you want to take it?
Sure. That was born out of the research we did in terms of, frostbite, wind chill, the varying climates within our community, and public health issues, generally speaking. And so we started actually with a lower temperature and raised it to the 28 degrees. So we brought quite a lot of research to the group, and that's what they settled on.
Okay, we can pick this up another time. I want to get back to the family discussion that we had with Emily. So go ahead, Emily.
Thanks, Barry. Sorry, folks. I lost internet. So I'm on my cell phone now, so I can't share my thing with you, but that's okay. It's not highly complicated. So we served 106 households in motels, families with children, and the range of stay was anywhere from 3 days to 6 months. So we have an average of about 6 weeks of a stay in a motel for families with kids. That's the average, but quite a few families staying for quite a bit longer than that, all the way up to 6 months. And the total for that cost was just under $300,000 for that time period. So again, that was September of last year through August of this year. So 106 households and about $300,000. Those exits were fairly good. We only had four of those 106 families served exited to unknown places or left sort of in a, sometimes they like had some damage to the room and just sort of left without participating in a program. So only 4 of those households out of 106. The rest ended up in one of our system interventions, which is really.
No.
Uh-oh.
No.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Come back, Emily.
Teleworking.
Everyone shake your monitors.
Is that how that works?
Where are you?
You know, that made it look like an earthquake, Michael.
Okay, Marcus had a question on the last subject. Go ahead, Marcus.
Yeah, I just wanted to remark that I know that we were talking about some of the budget stuff with, I know that Ann Beck was remarking about that a lot going into, you had enough money for some snacks and stuff, and the budget was going to be part of the drive on that. So I just wanted to remember that was part of the discussion there, guys, and that if there's money for it and if we have the places to go, then maybe we should consider softening the 28-degree mark because
I think
that's still pretty harsh.
And correct me if I'm wrong, if other folks are there, I don't think it was just solely budget. It was also budget in the sense of people power and capacity of folks. Just because it's you, Marcus, the work it's exhausting and it
sure is.
Yeah.
It's even worse when you do it on the street though. So
right. Absolutely. No, I know that. It's just, I think part of it too was the idea of if the temperature, anyway, I think in the end, nobody was ever really truly happy with it. I don't think any of us felt like this was, but we needed to have some kind of mark to be able to kick that threshold. So I know that's what that group really focused on.
And also, I just wanted to weigh in that I know that the city recently has approved more of the big color reader boards and stuff for different advertising and stuff around town. That'd be a great place for us to get our messaging out about our sheltering. So I think
Marcus, I would love to talk to you more about that too, because we really tried to hone in on having a single phone call and we changed the message so people knew where shelter was. So if you and I offline want to talk a little bit about what other things we can be doing to get the word out about shelter during the severe weather and regular winter season, please let's do that, because I want to make sure we're getting messages out.
I'm glad to
The reader boards are only on publicly zoned property, and the only entities doing that is the school district. So if you wanted to use the school district, they're their signs.
Okay, well maybe we can do that. Thank you.
Barry, real quick.
Ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
If we're going to get Emily back, but if we don't, I'm aware, and maybe Joel knows some. Oh,
there she is. There she is. Welcome back, Emily.
Sorry, folks, it's not my day with technology.
Well, yeah.
Okay, last just couple of things to say, which is that it would be really great if this team could dedicate some time to talking about what we think that anticipated need is, right? So this that I've just laid out, this 106 families with children that we served was over the past year. What I said before that is that we're seeing a significant rise in the number of families with children experiencing homelessness, and we're about to go into the cold season. The other factor is that a lot of these dollars, I don't have the exact number, but for example, 50,000 of the dollars that Lydia 300,000 were COVID emergency funds from private foundations. Council, I didn't get a number on that breakdown, but same with DV-SAS. Of that 300,000, a lot of this was one-time shot in the arm emergency COVID dollars that are not necessarily going to be available to us again. It was just a one-time sort of gift to the community. So I want us to be prepared as a work group to say kind of what is our stance as a community on unsheltered families with children. And if we're taking a stance that we're going to be responsive to that need over this duration of time through the winter, then we need to, then it is my request of us that we make a recommendation around increasing funding from city and county sources such that we can shelter those families as they come into our system. We know there's going to be an increased need, right? So this was $300,000 retroactive to the past year before we've seen sort of this big increase in need for families with kids. So that's a specific request that I have, just in case I get cut off again from technology, that we talk about, can this group make a recommendation on increased funding and take a stance as a community that we won't say, sorry, we're out of money when we come across, you know, a kiddo in their car with a parent. Or in a tent. So that's one request. And then Michael, I see you. I'll stop talking in 1 second. The other thing I want to mention is that I would also love, not at this meeting, but a future meeting, if we could talk about, in the interest of interim housing, is there a permanent facility? What would be our best case scenario for our community about the way that we handle and respond to children and their parents who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness? And the motel system, it works, but to be honest with you, it sucks. It's important and it works, and we're really glad we have it, but I think we could do better. And I would love to engage in a space about what would that actually look like if we could just design how we think that response should be as a community. What would that look like? Is that a permanent facility that we don't have? And would we rather spend $300,000 or $400,000 a year on kind of the ongoing service and operational costs of a facility? If we could get the capital upfront to get it built, would that be a better investment than this motel system? And so I'd love to have that conversation in a really thorough way, and hopefully maybe over the next course of months, maybe we could come up with a recommendation that we might start to be able to coalesce some funding ideas around for a permanent facility on interim housing for families with kids. And I won't repeat some of my comments from a couple meetings ago, but just to remind us that that families with children come with a diversity of need, and an apartment with a 12-month lease is not always off the bat the perfect solution. So having an interim housing option that can meet the needs of children and avoid further traumatization would be so great. Okay.
Councilmember Lillquist.
Well, Emily did a really good job of anticipating my question, because I think you could kind of tie the two together. If you could say that our stopgap measure costs around $300,000 a year or whatever, because we could average it across the years, and then basically say, could we spend that equivalent amount of money instead on the long-term solution? So we could keep spending the 300 until we finally get a permanent solution, which may end up costing us no more than 300 in, well, probably maybe a little more in operating costs, and then whatever the debt service would be. And so kind of the magnitude of the motel stays already tells you how big a permanent solution at a minimum you should be willing to pay for. So I think you've already got kind of one measure of the scale, the solution that's currently possible. And then I guess I'd like to have the rest of the conversation that Emily was talking about. Are we talking about a master leasing distributed housing model? Are we talking about one apartment building that we purchase and convert and provide services on site? I'd like to talk about what that would look like at some point.
Mike Parker.
Oh, my turn for technology issues. Sorry about that. I want to remind us too about something that Council Member Lilliquist brought up a time ago, which was that having these discussions sometimes when it seems like it's early is really smart. It turned out to be prophetic. So new dollars became available from Commerce exactly for sheltering. And I'm not trying to just say it, he's right, but you know what? It's really time to have this discussion. It's time to brainstorm the best option that we can come up with. And if that takes, this group has a good history of educating itself about an intervention. It doesn't have to figure every detail out, but you know, we could, maybe a subgroup of people, work up some options about what it might look like. What could an end, would it be like, it look like, so we could get some, you know, some conversation going around it and be ready. Because I think, like Council Member Lilliquist said, either there'll be an opportunity that comes to us, or we have to make the opportunity. But if we don't have the discussion, we won't be ready. So I want to just underscore my strong support for this discussion.
Thanks, Mike. Joel.
Yeah, I'd just like to second Emily's sort of call to action there, because I think it's really, really important that we get moving on something here quickly and, you know, move from, you know, what Michael is calling the stopgap solution to something, at least a step in the right direction. And I sent sort of an idea, I guess, to our subgroup that we haven't really had time to hash over, and we don't have time to hash it over here because I know we've still got stuff to cover and public comment and everything. But Michael, I don't know if your distributed housing model falls in line with this, but something along the lines of doing cabins, or, you know, something that can house a family rather than just an individual. It would cost more, but it would, you know, it would solve the problem for a number of, you know, so it might cost 4 to 5 times as much as, say, a HomesNOW tiny home, but it's going to house 4 to 5 more people. And you know, the biggest question is, you know, where's that going to go? And it seems to me that the county has land that could accommodate that kind of a thing. So I would like to sort of put it out there that I'm open to taking the time to hash out a plan or something with the county. I'm just not sure, you know, where to go from there with that.
Other discussion on this item?
Well, I would just circle back around to, I'm hoping we can have the permanent facility conversation at a later date, because what's feeling really urgent to me is, do we have the money allocated going into this winter month to respond to the needs that we're going to see for unsheltered children and their families? And so that to me feels like priority one is, do we have those funds available? And if not, can this group do any advocating or recommending to our council bodies to include some additional dollars this year to make sure that kiddos can get out of unsheltered situations and at least into what we have, which is motel systems. And I haven't had a chance to talk with Anne back to really look at, like, what are the resources that we have. We have, you know, private dollars, some city dollars, sometimes some county dollars. Opportunity Council has their own funding sources that try and piecemeal it together. We've got the Emergency Food and Shelter Program. So there's like little bits of piecemeal, but my concern is that some of the infusion of COVID dollars that we had last year will not be available this year. And with the increased need, that we're gonna need some additional resources in order to shelter those kiddos. So I'm hoping we can maybe start with that conversation and then talk about longer term facility once that is addressed.
Well, on the city side, I would need to punt immediately to our planning staff, because I really do not keep track of which pots of money are spent or committed and which ones still have anything in them. So.
And Deacon, I see you've appeared.
Hi. Yes, from time to time I try to spare you. we have additional monies that go beyond the CARES Act timeline. And I think we're in much better shape this year than we'll ever be in past years or future years. But I feel confident that we can meet the need to the extent that we have the funds, and we're in good shape. I think the issue for us is more availability of units than it will be money this year.
Of motel units, Anne?
Correct.
Any other comments on families and children? Okay. Additional action items. Is there anything that we want to move from a back burner to a front burner, or is there anything else? Yes, Marcus? You're muted, buddy.
My apologies. Emergency COVID relief shelter for all displaced people on the streets right now. That's action. I'm going to keep calling for it. I'm a homeless advocate on this work group.
Okay. Anything else? I want to make sure we have lots of time for public comment because I do have to leave at 3 to get somewhere else. But so if we don't have anything more, let's go ahead and open it up to public comment. Kathy Halka, do we have some folks with their hands raised?
Yes, we do. We have 3. For those of you who would like to speak, as a reminder, to request to speak, just virtually raise your hand by clicking the icon on your screen or dialing *9 by phone. The first speaker will be Doug Gustafson, followed by JC Mansfield, Gregg.
You're breaking up, Kathy.
Go ahead, Doug.
Okay, you guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Sorry, one sec. As some of you know, and for those who don't know, HomesNOW has turned in a proposal for the former Safe Haven site in the Whatcom 911 Dispatch Center. I want to read the letter that I sent today with our proposal to the City of Bellingham, including Mayor Fleetwood, the Council, and the Planning Department. I also CC'd the Whatcom County Council and the County Executive. HomesNOW, the email reads, HomesNOW is formally turning in our draft proposal to set up a second tiny home village in Bellingham. The project is called Safe Haven 2.0. This site would be slightly smaller than Unity Village and would service a maximum of 20 residents and 16 tiny homes, one tiny home being a staff office quarters for like if we had to sleep there. In the past, HomesNOW has operated a tent encampment in the Sunnyland neighborhood at 620 Alabama Street, the Whatcom 911 Dispatch Center parking lot. While operating as a tent encampment, we were well received by the Sunnyland neighborhood and they missed us once we were gone in general. The site continues to be an empty parking lot at this time, and since we've already been there before, it already has all the hookups we need and we can get up and running quickly. We do not require any government funds, but we would appreciate a portion of a parking lot in order to house more people and take some pressure off existing services. I'm sending this email to the Bellingham City Council, the Mayor, Bellingham, Seth Fleetwood, and the Bellingham Planning Department and Whatcom County Council, as well as Sat Paul Sidhu. I understand that this proposal is for a City of Bellingham site, but HomesNOW is also interested in working with the county in the future. And so I thought that having an example of our proposals would help make clear the high standards we have for health and public safety of residents of any tiny home community, as well as the overall community at large. As you all know, the eviction moratorium in Washington ends on October 15th. I think this will likely mean an increase in homelessness in the months ahead, and the Lighthouse Missions Base Camp has also been seeing an uptick in numbers beyond what the old drop-in center had. The team at HomesNOW wants to help alleviate the burden where it makes sense. We know that we can't service everyone in Whatcom County or the City of Bellingham, but we can do a lot to help make a dent in the problem and take the load off existing service providers while also reducing the number of people who are illegally camping, thus reducing the cost of camp cleanups to some degree. I would like to add that many, if not most, of the residents of Unity Village were formerly campers and have been moved along in the past. Setting up more of these villages, especially in areas not suitable for standard development, provides a straightforward way to increase the standard of living for more people, housed and unhoused, as well as reduces the visible signs of homelessness in town, such as illegal campsites. I would also like the Whatcom County Council member Barry Buchanan to add our proposal as an agenda item to the Homeless Strategies Workgroup meeting yesterday. if not the next one after that. Please review our draft proposal and get back to us as soon as you can on thoughts, alternatives, or concerns. I hope we can do this and house more people. Thanks. I have our copy of our proposal is available on our web, not on our website yet, but it will be, and on our Facebook page, so you can see it for yourself if you want. Anyway, take it easy.
So just one update to what you said, Doug. I think the governor yesterday extended the moratorium on eviction until the end of the year.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, I think that happened yesterday.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's great that it happened just in time.
Yeah. Okay, next speaker.
The next speaker is JC Mansfield.
JC, welcome.
Hi. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to echo what Doug said. That's really important stuff. Also, I want to say that even with Jay Inslee, Governor Inslee, removing or extending the moratorium, we're still looking at accrual of rent, and people will be having to. So just keep that in mind. Also, one of the problems that we actually were seeing last winter, and the winter that hit us so hard, was that people didn't know where to go after hours. So there's a lot of times where people were coming to HomesNOW because we had them in our registration catalog. We have a database with all of our people that have registered for tiny homes, and so we recognized their names, we knew what their situations were, and we were able to help them. And I'm wondering if the city could coordinate something like this for homelessness. And I'm hoping that maybe you guys will integrate this idea into your Homeless Strategy Workgroup, where you have a hub or a base online or in a kiosk or someplace where people can register and give you that information about what their situation is, and then you have their names and we know what services they need, and we can start to create that database, not just the pick count, but just have that about our local people here that need something. So just consider that. That's just a recommendation I would suggest, especially during winter months, because at that point in time when people are needing help, it's usually after hours when a lot of these access points are closed. So that's all I have to say. And I hope you guys are doing a great job. I really appreciate what you're doing. Thanks so much.
Thanks, JC.
Our next speaker is Melissa Gregg, followed by Dana Briggs and Sherry Lapoff. Go ahead, Melissa.
Melissa.
Hello, everybody. I just wanted to, echo, of course, Doug's thing. We need to get that up and going like big time. It's going to be bad this winter, and I am glad that they extended the moratorium, but people are still getting like illegally evicted and stuff too. So, I mean, as much as that does definitely help, and I'm not discounting it at all, it's just there's still going to be a little more of an uptick, I'm afraid, this winter with everything going on. I wanted to speak to Emily Connor's thing actually about housing families. Yeah, this is like. Okay, I just this last year became instantly houseless in 48 hours because my husband was assaulting children and tried to kill me and da da da. And I went to the Opportunity Council and I was offered a tent. I just heard you list so many resources that I've spent the last year and a half trying to get any sort of resources, and I haven't seen any of this support at all. I went to DB staff and asked them. They didn't know about any of this. I was at the Opportunity Council. I was never offered any sort of hotel room. I told them I'd be sleeping in my car. They offered me a tent with my son who's special needs. So this is so important because we're not getting any of this stuff. I don't know who is, but I have swaths of women like me and families like me who we're getting shoved off. I was never offered not 1/3 of the things you just mentioned, and I have no idea why. I was straight told they wouldn't put me in housing because I didn't make enough money to pay my own rent, so I could have a tent. So yeah, that really needs to be a #1 priority, and I'm really glad that you guys are discussing that as reverently as you are. And absolutely, as somebody who experienced it, it would be 1,000 times better if you guys had a apartment type thing or something that you could offer us as opposed to a hotel room or something. It feels better. It feels more like a home. It feels less horrific with everything. It's that idea. Please run with that. We need places that feel safe, places that feel almost like home, because we just lost everything that feels normal. So sorry, gonna get a little choked up. So please focus on that. That's very important. So that's from somebody who's experienced it and been failed by the system, please. And then aside to that, all of us that do wind up homeless, we need pallet shelters for when we do. So I would have wound up homeless if I didn't have friends, and I would need a pallet shelter right now. So get on it. Thank you so much. You guys are doing great. Keep trying, keep working.
Thanks, Melissa.
Let's see. The next speaker is Dana Briggs, followed by Sherry Lapoff. Go ahead, Dana.
Hello, Mr. Briggs. Welcome.
Hello. So to those of you that I know and those that I don't, yes, I'm back. This is one of those rare opportunities where I'm not working on a Friday and I could actually listen and speak to some issues. So, Emily, is the draft matrix going to be available to the general public for them to take a look and comment on?
Yes, when we send that to the group, it'll go in the packet for the next meeting.
Appreciate it. Number two, let me point out something from my perspective. I'm now coming up on 3 years in a motel on Samish Way. I work damn near full-time at the hospital. There's a lot of homeless people in here that are in here now that are not on Opportunity Council programs or anybody else's programs because they got moved out of the villa when it shut down in the next door adjacent property, and that there's others that are sitting out there. You all are probably at least semi-aware that the magnitude of the problem is a lot larger than just those that you know about. Families that are trying to make it, but for whatever particular reason have to wait a long time, are still coming to do the best they possibly can for their children and put them in at least some kind of sheltered arrangement, even if they're not receiving any aid from anybody in any way, shape, or form. And I'm not sure that you even know that they exist. I see it every day. The priorities for this whole thing is that all the different categories of the homeless have some kind of special needs. There is no such thing as a special needs population. Every one of them has different sets of circumstances that are basically special needs. Okay, so that's my philosophy on things. As somebody who experienced homelessness both as a child and as an adult, yes, it can be stressful, but especially for children, even if you are bunking up and couch surfing with extended family members and or friends. And that happened to me when I was a child decades ago, and I've never forgotten that, okay? So I can understand where they're going through on this. Something that I said more than a year ago and maybe approaching now 2 years ago on a slightly different subject, I am concerned about all the homeless that are sitting out there outside of the greater Bellingham area that basically have no place to go or are in situations where they literally can't get out of it, whether it's in the eastern part of the county or somewhere in the northern part of the county. We need to be finding out, even though the percentage of the homeless in the total for the county may be less than it is in the greater Bellingham area, what's going on with that homeless population outside of Bellingham, and what, if anything, is being done for them, especially by the 6 small cities. And last but not least, yes, you're going to be hearing a lot more from me. I kind of took a respite from all of this, and any way that I can help from a perspective or from an analytical standpoint, I'd be more than happy to do so. And it's good to see a lot of you. Keep up the good fight.
Yeah, and welcome back to the fight, Dana. Glad you could join us today.
The last speaker is Sherry Lapoff. And if anyone else would like to speak, if you could please virtually raise your hand by clicking the hand icon or dialing *9 by phone. Go ahead, Sherry.
Hi, thank you. I also volunteer with HomesNOW, and I do outreach with people downtown with food and clothes. And so as much as I appreciate, well, I do very much appreciate Emily's information about trauma and the importance of housing families, which it just has gelled for me that certainly is a priority for this group to invest in. But being on the street, my passion and my work is trying to help people live till morning. And the one thing is that there's only one temperature that has anything to do with, calling a weather emergency, and that is 32 degrees or above. That's the temperature at which flesh freezes, and that's what we're trying to avoid, is frozen fingers and toes. I've seen many people with missing toes, missing parts of their feet from frostbite from sleeping outside. Another thing I'm just going to throw in quickly is that for safe RV, for safe parking, RVs and cars, I am going to suggest 808 Chestnut, which is across the street from the old St. Luke's emergency room. And the property back there, there's an enormous amount of property, a perfect parking lot that could easily be set up for safe parking. And of course, Civic Field, of course, vast amounts of property that are not being used at all. And that is a shame. The other thing is that I don't know if people realize that food has, for people that are literally on the street who have nothing, the food bank, thank God, they're doing what they're doing, and I appreciate it very much. But families and people are receiving a quarter to a half of what they were receiving before the food bank downtown closed, the walk-in food bank. And the other thing is that Maple Alley Inn, run by the Opportunity Council, closed months ago. They did, I'm sure between 200 and 300 meals every week for people that have nothing. So now these people have nothing, and that is a huge hole. Other agencies have figured out how to do either smaller sessions of food, of meals, or for takeout. And other agencies have figured that out, and it's really time for that to come back. There was a lot of money that Opportunity Council put in there, and I would like to see that go back to the bellies of the people that are extremely hungry. Thank you very much for everything. I appreciate having the opportunity to listen in. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. Anybody else, Kathy?
Yes, we have one more speaker listed as HK Mobile. Go ahead and please state your full name for the record.
Hello, Kathy. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Oh, great. Let me get my gadget working. Hi, this is Heather Katahdin. Hi, Barry.
Hi.
Hi, city and county staff and council persons with the Homeless Solutions Workgroup. Thank you for working together on community solutions that are accessible to all our citizens. Please do create a downtown kiosk, as JC had mentioned on the comments, on publicly zoned property, possibly the libraries, as there's a lot of physical traffic there, foot traffic, and to have them physically updated during the severe winter months, November through February, updated daily in regards to addresses of shelters that are open each night. Last year, each night was different in regards to availability, and the phone system was not always up to date. And during Thanksgiving holiday, there weren't daily, nightly updates, and we did have severe weather. Also, the public is aware that the Bellingham City has not yet identified which specific publicly owned properties are best suited to be used for emergency staging for overflow sites when the faith group shelters are too full, and for use when outdoor tent shelters have been swept leaving citizens dispersing without any guidance of where they can safely rest. November weather and the Thanksgiving holiday is coming up, and it would be great to have some specific plans and addresses. Outreach citizens need multiple property addresses identified for emergency overflow during this upcoming winter. And I wanted to share great work, Emily and Mike, what you shared at the beginning of the meeting, and Anne and all other members. Stay well. We have a great community. I yield the rest of my time.
Thanks, Heather. Anyone else, Kathy?
There's no one else with their hand raised at this time.
Okay, we'll close the public comment period. Anything else for the good of the order, folks?
Councilmember Buchanan, if you could just back up to the approval of the meeting summary from the last meeting. We could do that real quick.
I'm sorry, I skipped right over that.
Thank you.
So if anyone would like to make a motion to accept and approve the meeting summary.
I would so move.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, just say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? That passes unanimously. Okay, anything else for the good of the order? Well, thanks everybody. I appreciate everything you do. We will see you again in 2 weeks, and have a great weekend and a week ahead. We are adjourned.